Hello. There we go.
Hello. Is that you, lads?
Hey.
There we go. We have take off. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, not too bad. So this phone tends to be a little on the crap side, so I don't know what the sound like to your end, but it ain't quite here.
Oh,
I don't tend to use it. It normally gets thrown down the back of the TV so that we can only use it when we need to.
yes, quite indeed. They can be testy things, all right. Oh, you wouldn't believe the hassle we've had trying to get this on. They certainly do want us broadcasting whatever you've got to say, lads, that's for sure. Right. Oh,
Every time I try and have any kind of radio, any sort of radio thing, if anybody knows I'm going on in advance, everybody struggles with it. Trouble seems to follow me around. It's kind of funny, actually.
yeah, there we are. You can't. Yeah, as they say, you only take flack when you're over the target, as one of the boys once said. Right. Listen, we've lost a bit of time, so we'll drill straight into it. Do you want to give the listeners a little bit of a background, Laz, of what you do and how you got here, brother?
Hi. Yeah, that's a complex subject in itself.
Well,
basically, I've always had a bit of an interest in history, and as this sort of time went on, I just started figuring out things aren't right. It doesn't work out right. All these different things and one thing and another, and everybody's sort of trying to. I just can't figure out what's wrong. So I started looking and digging and trying to figure out what the hell was going wrong. And over the last couple of years, I've been fiendishly studying not the Constitution itself, word for word, but the colour of it, for want of a better way of putting it, the mood of the Constitution, where it comes from, where its origins are, why it was written the way it was written, who we are as a people, why we are the only people who have law that works this way, and what the hell went wrong, essentially.
absolutely. And there's been quite a few things gone wrong along the way, Laz, isn't it? The history of this thing, it goes back almost to the beginning, really, doesn't it?
Oh, entirely. I mean, I've got, I can trace written law, because before that, of course, it was all part of bardic tradition. But I can trace written law in this country right the way back to about 460 BC. So, everybody's, we've got 2,000 years worth of history, and the rest.
Absolutely. And before that even, our most ancient laws, as we discussed in the pre-show, they weren't actually written down at all, Lazarus, were they? And they were passed on from generation to generation. And people...
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the point at which, we're one of these, we have these strange traditions. Things like bonfire night. That's a recent sort of twist on an earlier tradition. See, burning the guy on Guy Fawkes night, it's just become known as that since Guy Fawkes night. But the tradition itself dates back much, much earlier, and it all goes back to the Wicker Man. There's all these different traditions, and sure, things change over time, but if you lose the root of them, if you lose where they're actually from, then you don't get what the point of them actually is.
Absolutely. And that's often what happens, isn't it? I mean, when a people or a country loses its way, we need to look back into history to see and amend things, and this is where we find lots of remedies, isn't it? Yeah,
entirely. Well, it's what originally would have been known as the Servitutis Urbanae and Rusticae, which is basically the civic and rustic burdens. This is the way that people would look back on things. I'm talking in bloody legal Latin, of course, but then you've got things like Praetorium Memoria Eventorum, which is the record of past events. And that was all how the common law works. That's where it's established from. It's, there's a precedent set. Something happened before. This has already been agreed. This has already been dealt with. This is what we're allowed to do. And all this sort of constant trying to change things, and Parliament trying to change things, and all these different things that are going on. Most of it, if anything, is actually complete crap, and nobody should be following them. But everybody does for some bizarre reason. It's really quite strange.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult to really grasp how the conditioned mind goes along with some of the rules and regulations. Or you need to put your hand and ask for everything. I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to grow carrots out your back these days without getting permission off somebody. It's totally absurd, isn't it? I mean,
well, a lot of it. I don't tend to contribute to conspiracy what I can explain through stupidity a lot of the time. And a lot of these different regulations and governing bodies and governing regions and new governors and different czars for this and czars for that, and a new office of, head of which way the batteries are supposed to go round, and this sort of crap. A lot of this is stuff that's been coming up in modern region and in modern terms, where the government are desperately trying to create jobs. So they're coming up with jobs for people to do to try and get their own unemployment numbers down. But of course, all they do is they put a board of about 5 different people together who cause misery for the millions in the rest of the country just to see if they can get. But it's only 5 people. And you're dealing with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that are out of work. And yay, we've created work. Well, they can say that then. They can say they've created work. 5 jobs. Put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen. Let's all have a celebration.
Yes, it's completely farcical. I mean, even the jobs that are available aren't really jobs at all. They're just tasks, menial tasks that are really soul-breaking, but people are forced into a situation where they have to take on these tasks in order to pay the debt slave system just to be alive.
Well, this is it. The whole thing's bizarre. I mean, it's all completely set back to front. But this is one of the things that tends to happen. It's the more corrupt a situation becomes, the harder it is to get out of it. And the more you set the system up to rely on money so that you can get money, the more people then have to be chasing after money rather than life or liberty or time at home or the family or anything like that. And this is all typical Frankfurt School stuff. All absolutely typical Frankfurt School stuff, and it's all down to this communist principle and these socialist ideals and one thing and another. But the one thing that people never put together with that, they think it's the sharing of the wealth. They've got this sort of bizarre concept that it's the sharing of the wealth, or redistributing the wealth, should we say, is the right term for it. But there's one thing that they always overlook. It's also centralising power, centralising government, centralising all the property rights and everybody's rights and everything into government power and into government hands, and centralising everything. Everything's got to be centralised. Centralised banks, centralised power, centralised judiciary, centralised. And of course, if you've got 3 or 4 people who've then got all the power, all the money, and absolute corruption corrupts absolutely, the whole thing's going to go to hell. But this is the whole point of it, because then all the money gets passed through their hands, and then they can charge interest on it and make a fortune.
Absolutely correct, sir. Now then, whilst we'll drill into this a bit more, because this is not the first time in history that this has actually happened, Lazarus, is it?
No, there's been several different things. Well, all at once, yes. That's the bizarre thing about the period that we've got at the moment, the time that we've got at the moment, is that it has all happened at once. The whole concept of fiat currency, the whole concept of fiat currency was Charles I. He started making brass coins instead of the gold and silver ones.
Correct.
And things started to escalate, and the entire economy started to go bizarre, and all the banks started doing all these funny tricks and things like that because of this fiat currency, and then started applying usury and all these different things. But of course, the problem with that is that it causes all the problems that it causes. And Charles I, one of the things that he ended up with was ultimately after the Bill of Rights and one thing, the guy lost his head. He ended up beheaded for bringing out a fiat currency. And the bizarre thing is, all these different old phrases and sayings that we have that date from before that point in time, things like money doesn't grow on trees. But the bizarre thing is, it does nowadays. It's paper. Paper comes from trees. Money does grow on trees. And nobody seems to think, well, that's completely upside down because it's not supposed to grow on trees. And we don't seem to be able to figure out why all our old phrases and sayings suddenly don't make sense anymore. And it's bizarre. It's such a weird turn of events.
Yes,
but there is nothing new under the sun, literally. All these things have all been tried before different points in time. The vast majority of them were under Charles I. Some of them, obviously, with King John. Then you've got, the result of that was Magna Carta. Then you had, ultimately, with King Charles, you had the Remonstrance and the Petition of Right, the Declaration of Right, and all those sorts of bits and pieces. And we constantly find these. Look, we always, as a culture, figure out exactly what is wrong, and we put it right. And we do it in a bizarre way. We normally get a piece of paper out, we write down on a piece of paper all our demands as a petition, and we go, right, both, this is what you're doing wrong, we don't want this anymore, sort it out.
Yes, indeed. And we are certainly faced with a perfect storm, for want of a better way of describing it, in today's world, where all these things are accumulating at one point, and it's quite extraordinary how, even in the last death throes of the system now, I mean, it's cracking everywhere. You can see that. But trying to pass these things through Parliament, and it's basically treasonous in order to sustain the thing, Lazarus, isn't it?
Well, this is one of the things about English law that people have forgotten, because they're not taught this sort of thing anymore. There's an old point in English law that the Crown can do no wrong. Now, if you were to say that to someone in Egypt or China or France or Germany or something like that, they would just automatically assume, well, the Crown is immune to prosecution. Now, the Crown can do whatever it likes and nothing it does can ever be wrong. And they've always had this totalitarian system, so they're used to it. But England is very strange. Britain in general is very strange on that basis because we don't work like that. And when somebody here says the Crown can do no wrong, it's more that it has no capacity to do wrong. And this is one of the things that Magna Carta left a legacy of, was that whenever the Crown steps out from under the rule of law, we have the opportunity, we have the power, and we have the ability to put it back.
Absolutely.
And this is something that people just constantly forget.
Yes, I'm afraid they do, and it always comes to this point where at the end of the day, it's left to we start off as the minorities, I suppose, within the communities and the towns and the cities, who realise that there's something majorly wrong, and over time the numbers gather, we start to really take a good look at this stuff, and we're able to find that indeed there are remedies there and solutions that have been put there that people have faced in previous times. So I'd just like for you to explain to our listeners how we differ as a nation in dealing with these times. I mean, for example, the French would deal with it totally differently, wouldn't they? And I mean, the revolutions and the blood that spread there all over Europe. These isles are special, Lazarus, aren't they?
Yeah, but we do tend to do things a little differently. And this is where our constitution comes from. This is the sort of reasoning for it. This is how it developed, and this is how it's always been. England, Scotland, and Wales, and Cornwall, and they do this sort of little hub, if you like. Well, we've always been sort of cut off from the rest of the continent by the English Channel, so we've always had our peculiarities. We've always been a little bit strange. But we managed to preserve the original freedoms, or at least far more of them than anybody else did. And the reason for it was because we were so cut off. But, I mean, there's a big sort of... Henry II played a large part in this. He didn't quite become one of the greats, but ultimately Alfred the Great was the one who became the great. There were some others that ought to have got that title, but ultimately didn't. And you have to sort of look back, and when you look back, you can find out that man had every right going here. In terms of having private liberty is the best way of putting it, rather than absolute freedom, because, I mean, the freedom to go out and kill, murder, and rape just isn't something that we aspire to. But private liberties, English lawyers always used to say that they consisted first of property, and that's the right of enjoying exclusively the gifts of fortune and all the various fruits of your own industry. The second was always the right of personal security, and the third was always of locomotive faculty. And yeah, that's basically putting liberty in a much more confined sense. I mean, there's this whole tendency that we've got at the moment for people to kind of overcompensate because they're seeing that everything is so disturbed, so twisted, so corrupt, and so screwed that they've gone from one extreme to the other, and that's where this whole free man thing comes in. And yes, they ultimately have all of the absolute rights, but you need to find the particular remedy for it. And because our Constitution works the way it does, there's bits in there in each of the different documents, almost every single one of them has got a cure for one of these problems. But people don't read it because it's too much. There's too much of it. It's long, it's arduous, it's boring, And the worst offenders for this are the people in government and that sort of stuff. They're the absolute worst for it because not a single one of them. I mean, we went down to, me and a group of other people took a copy of Magna Carta down to the Houses of Parliament over a year ago. And we stood in one of the big halls. And there was all these different MPs milling around, and there was some different press and one thing and another milling around. And one of the MPs came up and approached us and sort of said to him, what's your favourite part of Magna Carta? And he sort of looked at us a little bit gone out. And he said, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, Magna Carta, do you know what it is? Right? I said, yeah. I said, what's your favourite part? At which point he said, I have to read it.
Incredible.
Now, that sends warning bells off all over the place, straight away, because the absolute foundation stone of, well, the cornerstone, really. It's not the foundation, it's more the cornerstone of the entire English Constitution. And they don't even know what's in it. They've never read it. Now, how can you follow the rules if you've never read them? This is the point, and this is kind of the problem, and this is what happens, and we've got this sort of weird apathy and this strange sort of, well, we've just abandoned it. we kind of let it go because there's something better on TV, or there's, we can always go out for a meal tonight, or we can, go and do all these different wonderful things, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, sleepwalking into just a plethora of misery. And it's absolutely bizarre. But people aren't taught any of it. And neither do they take it on themselves to read it either.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there's something very significant that they've tried to do recently. When I say they, I mean the government in coalition with the European Union. Can we go into that a bit, Lazarus?
Oh, this is from the 1st of November. Yeah, that was very interesting. There was a whole sort of scenario where they're trying to sign everybody over to the EU, ratifying more and more of these bloody treaties. But the problem that they've got is that, all these different treaties and one thing and another are all very well and good. But when you look at the different ways that we are governed here, etc., you've got to sort of sit and think, okay, you've got to have the popular consent to do this. The general consent of the kingdom needs to be there for you to do this. Otherwise, it's a clear act of treason. And as I was saying earlier, the Crown can do no wrong. So if the Crown can do no wrong, then an unjust law by the Crown ought not be followed. It's as simple as that.
Well,
so if they've gone and signed everybody over to the EU, then they did it without our consent, so that's automatically null and void. If our name wasn't on that document, we're not part of it. So basically what our, quote, leadership, unquote, have done is signed themselves over and abandoned us.
In a nutshell. And I think that which goes into this also, as well as the paedophilia and everything else that goes on with the elites, or the so-called elites, I should say, is the little change of the law the royals have done in the last fortnight, where they are not even allowed to be investigated now.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It really is bizarre. But it's trying to figure out, and this is again nothing new. Having Charles I, Charles I tried to do the same trick as well, but one of William's sons, Edward, I think it was, went out hunting with his brother and was involved in a hunting accident where his brother killed him. And then his brother, going after the throne, etc., was sort of everybody's going, oh, no, we don't like this, we don't trust you one bit. So he investigated himself and he found himself not at fault.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
There's all sorts of stuff like this, and it always, these things just repeat and repeat and repeat, and it's always going on. None of these are new things. None of them. And it's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, the government investigating the government and finding there was no wrongdoing at all, yes. I mean, it's a very familiar story over and over and over. I mean, in every level of it, every department of the cesspool.
Oh, cup of tea. Yeah, but this is exactly what they're doing. But the only way that they've got this sort of idea of it is because they've sort of picked up on the concept of, well, we can investigate ourselves. It's like, great, okay, I'll investigate myself for whatever I feel like I shouldn't have done and just, claim that I've done nothing wrong. Okay, well, I'm bound to.
Absolutely.
If everybody was given that opportunity, then we'd all be doing it. But this again goes back to being under the rule of law, not the rule of Parliament, nor the rule of the Crown, nor the rule of anybody else.
Well, yes, and I mean, you're quite right. These things have all repeated before, and it's one big cycle. Now, it's obvious to anybody that we're at the end of the cycle now. I mean, it's Caligula and his horse time. They've abandoned the laws. They're absolutely desperate. The fiat currency is about to crack. It may seem really dark to people out there at the moment, but it is always the darkest before the light, as they say. Can we tell people about some of the more magical times in our history that we've had? I mean, we talk about a moneyless society, and we've had these things before on these islands, Lazarus, haven't we?
And the rest. But this is one of the things that kind of makes me giggle a bit, because everybody looks at these different things and they think instantly. I say the word to somebody, oh, medieval. Something's medieval. There's brutal punishment. Oh, it's so medieval. Living in such a squalid little hole, it's so medieval. But we describe things that are medieval which really aren't. Things like workhouses and that sort of thing, that's very much in the Victorian period. Gulags and concentration camps are all 20th century things. In the medieval period, when sort of everything came back and everybody followed very closely the common law, they kept track of it. And it was, again, it's a sort of result of Magna Carta. We went through this medieval period. And during this time, if you gave, or if you granted one of the local lords 27 days of labour a year, you got a house and some land. 27 days instead of 25 years. You had 80 days of holiday a year, and these were all holy days. These were holidays actually insisted upon by the church. So, you've got your own house, you've got your own land, you've got no mortgage, you've got 80 days worth of holiday every year that are by force, and you just go out and do some work in the field when you need to, etc.
Sounds like Gaddafi's Libya.
Well, yeah. It wasn't exactly the hardest time, It wasn't as evil as people believe it was. We invented hospitals and, hospitals being places of hospitality as much as anything else. And, the printing press, and we moved forward to all these different technologies, and we learned how to farm more effectively and cooperatively, and everybody sort of came together, and we made some really massive advancements. And we went through almost a small renaissance in a way. And every time that these things happen, and every time that these big societal changes happen, and government basically, or the king or whatever, loses control, we hit these renaissances. I mean, other places, they don't quite go through the same sort of thing. But even the French Renaissance, it came after the French Revolution. If you go and you look at it, all these renaissances always follow revolutions. They always follow these periods where everybody thinks, oh, the whole thing's about to come crumbling down. Well, yeah, but what they don't realise is that after that point, because there's no more division, the communities start to come together again.
An explosion of freedom.
Everybody starts to work with each other again, and they start to develop and create, and everybody gets more time off and more time with their family and more time. And it gets ridiculous. But everyone's sort of running around. I mean, if you look at it from this sort of perspective, everyone is now, as it stands at the moment, they wake up in the morning, they ship, shower and shave, they go rushing out, jump in their car, scream to work, and spend 40 hours a week there, maybe an hour getting to work, an hour getting back. So that's another 10. So that's 50 hours out of the week. Then there's, 8 hours a night, so 16, 36. You've got You've got several days lost at work. You've got several days lost sleeping. So you maybe end up with about 16 hours during the week potentially to yourself, and maybe about 20 hours at the weekend if you get a full weekend to yourself. The stupid part about it is that all of this time you're running backwards and forwards to try and make enough money to keep the car that you're having to sit in for an hour to go to work each way, and to pay for the house that you're never in because you're always out working. So why am I the only one who thinks that that's absolutely mental?
Well, it is insanity. I mean, people think they own the houses that they buy, but in actual fact, the house owns them, and they better go and work in McDonald's or sweep the streets or whatever to pay for it. Otherwise, that bank's going to steal it, and you're going to be out in the streets shoved cold.
Yeah.
So
but
essentially,
it's a stupid thing, and you've got to be doing that for 25 years instead of 27 days.
Well, that's it. I mean, you do not own your house. Your house owns you.
Yeah, and it's bizarre. But again, it's completely backwards and upside down. And the more you start to look into these things, the more you start to realise that, things are screwed up. But I mean, there's elements again, and this is one of the things that that always kind of makes me giggle, and that's this trying to play the name game. Lose the name, or you don't want to, the legal name, it's got to go out the window. No. You don't. All of that stuff has gone completely to, it doesn't, none of it actually matters when you know about it, and when you know what the subject is, and if you know what the cause of the problem was. In 1135, you've got to go back to now, there was a manuscript copy of Justinian's Digest, which is the Pandects as it was known. And the Pandects were discovered in a place called Amalfi on the eastern coast. I can't remember if it's the western coast of Italy. And this was basically a classical copy of the Roman law. And this is what brought about the revival of Roman law studies in the medieval period. And this is where it's starting to get a little bit funny. But that was in 1135. Now, in 1138, something quite interesting happened, because it was realised that, these things weren't particularly clever, and it didn't quite work, because it was allowing the church. The church started screaming backwards and forwards, basically, and started getting onto everybody's case, because it became what was known then as ecclesiastical law. And the clergy were the only people, really, who were educated to the point where they could read and could read these things. So they were the only ones who started to use this, and they started to use this Roman law and concepts of people being able to tell other people what they could and could not do. And this is essentially the roots of civil law. And this is, trying to remember the Latin off the top of my head, quod principi procurit legis habet vigorum.
Try saying that 10 times fast.
Yeah. But the literal translation of it is, that which pleases the prince has the force of law. A decision by the emperor has the force of statute. It's basically one man can now tell you what to do. Nobody even thought of this. Everybody was all sort of running around, and were quite an interesting sort of combination of paganism and Christianity. That's what the whole English church is about. It's not a Puritan thing at all. All the Puritans disappeared to America later on, but that's a different story. But you end up with this sort of thing whereby everybody's sort of starting to get bullied, and the church is starting to attack people's liberties and freedoms and things like that. And this is going on and develops from sort of 1135 up to about 1138. Then we get a guy called King Stephen. Now, hands up or just shout yes if you've ever heard of King Stephen.
My hand up.
Right. Do you know why King Stephen was significant?
No, but I think the slide there. Would you like to jump in there, James?
Isn't it the Feast of Stephen for King Wenceslas?
Well, there might be something to do with that, but it's more to do with this whole concept of Roman law.
Okay.
He banned it.
Wow.
It was banned. It was banned by the king in 1138, and he said specifically that it cannot be used in this country. It can be studied in the monasteries and the universities, because yes, we had, in the medieval period, we also invented universities. You can study it in your monasteries and in universities, but you cannot use it. It's only there as a historical curiosity. You are not allowed to use this, ever. It is not to come up out, and it's never to come up ever again.
Sounds familiar.
Now, the other funny one, again, and just because everybody, but we're not run by the king anymore. So the king's word doesn't necessarily follow, and we've got Parliament instead. Well, okay, here we go. The nobility under the reign of Richard II. Now, at the time, you're dealing with the sort of late 14th century. So people are, in a lot of the sort of upper houses and the Lord of the Manor, etc., they're all speaking French. So a lot of the different things that come from that period are in French. And there's one which is Presque le Realme d'Angleterre devant ses heures, mais à longtemps duros. Notre Seigneur and Seigneur du Parlement unique ne sera rulé et gouverné par la civile. Translated, inasmuch as the kingdom of England was not before this time, nor according to the intent of the King our Lord and Lords of Parliament, ever shall be ruled or governed by the civil law. And that was given in a declaration, in the 1378 declaration from the House of Lords. This stuff has been banned repeatedly, and it keeps creeping back in. But nobody knows that it's been banned because nobody's been told that it's been banned. And the whole legal name and all these different things are all principles of commerce, Roman law. But it doesn't matter because the Roman law was banned. But it's bizarre because people just don't read this stuff. It's absolutely hilarious. I've got my car sits out on the front. It hasn't had road tax on it since March last year. I just don't bother anymore. I just don't bother. It's all civil law. I don't need to worry about it. Don't class me as a civilian. I'm not interested.
Well, you absolutely spot on. I mean, what else can you do?
Could you explain that little comment you just made then, you're not a civilian? Could you just expand on that a little, please, Lazarus?
Right, okay. Being not a civilian. No, I'm a native. My family's English. We're English. We've always been in England. I've got my family. I've got parts of my family tree running back to the 1100s. Before all this stuff before half this stuff was even discovered. I'm a member of the indigenous. I have a much more tribal attitude about the whole thing. And this is one of the things, again, that people forget is that the English very specifically are a tribe. The Welsh very much are a tribe. The Cornish very much are a tribe. And we have all these different tribal areas. The Cornovii, the the Dubongi, the Korotari, there's all these different tribal names for different tribal regions all over this country, and people have just completely forgotten it.
Yes, I mean, it has always been that way, Lazarus, hasn't it? Since all the way back to when we first had the written charters and whatnot from way back in the day.
Well, I mean, you can go back even further than that. I mean, recently there was or at least fairly recently, there was a skeleton that was discovered in Cheddar Gorge, in one of the caves, known as Cheddar Man. And they dated this guy to around 9,000 years ago. And he shares DNA with a guy who teaches in the local school. Now, people don't move that far.
Wow. Well, there we go. And I mean, through all these times, we've been able to freely exist alongside each other and trade and commerce, as we are an island, with the rest of Europe and the world, and peacefully so. But it's then when people try to conquer and suppress the freedoms of the people is when we have trouble, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is it. Even this sort of concept, I mean, the Laudibus Legum Angliae, okay, it's all sort of, a lot of this stuff tends to come back to this concept of it being very much English, because the English had this, very much had this sort of pride about this sort of thing. And there were always parts of it, and this is one of the reasons why you get all these conflicts. There were always parts of it which the Welsh didn't agree with. There was always parts of this that the Scots didn't agree with. There was always parts of it that the Irish didn't agree with. Well, okay, that's fine. You know, we're English, we have our ways of doing things. You be Irish, you be Welsh, you be Scottish, you have your ways of doing things. Leave it at that. Just, you know, do your own thing. Don't let us stop you. Unfortunately, the English repeatedly have tried to, and that's why you end up with Offa's Dyke and, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, I wouldn't say the English per se. I mean, it's definitely the Crown. And
well, yeah, largely, but the vast majority of the time, well, in actual fact, in reality, the Crown isn't English.
Quite right.
It's not English, and it hasn't been since, Struth. London hasn't been part of England, central London hasn't been part of England since about 500 and something. I mean, when a lot of this tends to get used. A lot of that was stuff that was going on around the Anglo-Saxon period, is when it originally started, because the Anglo-Saxons, everybody's, we're all Anglo-Saxon, everybody in England's Anglo-Saxon. No, only if you come from Kent. The entire country had Anglo-Saxon stuff, because, you know, Germany comes out with a brand new BMW, somebody here starts driving around in it. The Anglo-Saxons come out with a new shaped knife that tends to cut stuff better. Some guy in Scotland a couple of years ends up with one in his hand. You know, the fashion develops and technology develops, and these things and these ideas are traded. But it doesn't mean that because you found an Anglo-Saxon knife up in Chester that the whole country was Anglo-Saxon, because we weren't. You know, 6 dozen boats with a couple of dozen people in each doesn't replace an entire population. It can't.
Well, even more than that. I mean, people from outside, from other lands, were welcome and granted lands.
Oh yeah. I mean, people from straight before Holland finally succumbed to the sea, or at least large parts of Holland and Denmark. They were granted the Isle of Wight. And if you look at people who are on the Isle of Wight, a lot of the actual sort of the long-standing families that have been there for millennia are invariably paler haired than everybody else.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't all war and conquest. Peoples were invited, and indeed, as you say, encouraged, I would say, to
not encouraged. Invariably, what happened was an agreement was reached, and it was when people, going back to this concept of the Hook of Holland, when Holland started to succumb to the sea, as the sea level started to rise, and this was in the very the very early run up to the sort of 1st century BC, 2nd century BC to about the 5th century BC. It sort of the sea levels from that point onwards started to rise quite a lot, and the sea levels are actually quite high at the moment. Everybody's sort of panicking, going, "Oh, global warming, we're all going to drown." No, we're not, because they've actually dropped quite a fair way. They were much higher at that point, and when a lot of the sort of area of Holland started to go underwater, and anything up to about the 5th century AD, the guys from there basically were saying, "Look, all the Germanic tribes are going crazy at our backs. We're running out of land. Can you help us?" So, and various kings and one thing and another from Wessex and around that sort of neck of the woods said, "Look, there are very, very few people on the Isle of Wight. We'll talk to them. We'll agree with them, and if they agree, then you can go on to the Isle of Wight with these other guys." And they agreed, and it was by agreement. It was always by agreement. It wasn't a case of, "Oh, yeah, everyone and anyone, come on, let's. It was always a case of, right, okay, as long as you are going to behave yourself, as long as you're going to do what you're told, as long as you're going to toe the line, and no, until you've been here for 7 generations, you are not a part of us. And if you misbehave, we will kick you out."
Yes, you're quite right. It is written down that it's either 7 or it could even be 9.
It was 7 generations was typically the common law established principle, which gives somebody the right to class themselves as native.
Yeah,
is 7 generations.
But small peoples could freely travel the lands. I mean, it's when people come with the army, then it starts to change a bit. But even then, our traditions have always remained, as we touched upon earlier. Right, just for a minute, Laz, I'll just put full phone numbers out for the listeners if you want to get in and give us a call. The UK number is 347 677 0812. If you're outside the UK, it's 0013 47 67 70 812. You can email us with questions for Lazarus at the Common Law Court of Wales at outlook.com. You can visit our website at www.com, the Common Law Court of Wales.co.uk. We're also on Facebook. Are we looking for a little 1-minute break, Andy, for the refreshment? Would that be okay? We're coming up to the hour now.
Oh, cup of tea.
Yes, we'll squeeze a quick one. Then we'll have about a minute or so if you want to shove the curtain on, Lazarus. And we'll drill into it in the second half, brother.
Yeah, no problem.
Lovely. Thank you. Andy, if you want to take us to the break then, we'll have a short break. And again, I'd encourage the listeners to phone in and give some questions to our special guest, Lazarus Ryalbran. Seems like there's no music going on. We'll have anything after while Laz is getting a cup of tea, James. How do you find Laz?
Very interesting.
Absolutely, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've seen a few of his videos, obviously, so we're a bit clued up on Lazarus' background already. He's an excellent guest so far. I was thinking that who I was talking to, when we've been at the Common Law Court of Wales in the Maple Club on Tuesdays.
Yeah, it was a great meeting Tuesday, wasn't it?
It was. And I was talking to the lady there, her name is Anne. She's got a great in-depth knowledge of a lot of history. She traced her family tree back to around 400 AD, which is which is a long way back, isn't it?
It's just a bit.
She had me fascinated with her in-depth knowledge of the Khazars, which was like, the Semitic races and so on.
Yeah.
I was thinking that she'd have been a better host than me at the moment.
So perhaps you'll ring in. Perhaps you'll give us a ring, Han. You're listening, give us a ring, lad. Oh, aye. That's a nice couple.
Fascinating.
Yeah. All sorted, lad?
Yeah, I'll just set it to boil. It gets a bit noisy, but I'm out of the room, so it'll be all right. It's not a problem.
There we go. Right, where do you want to take us? Lads, where would you like to pick this up by?
Oh, okay.
Should we talk about a document you wrote recently and the reasons behind that?
The remonstrance.
Yes, the remonstrance.
Go on, then.
That's a fairly amusing one. If anybody wants to read it, I mean, any of the common law court guys know where to get hold of it. I know Rhiannon and the Coventry, they've got a copy.
Yes.
An original copy, the digital one, but they've got a copy. And it's, if you like, it's shortened. It's very much truncated, despite the fact that it's still very long. It's as hard as I could researched idiot's guide to the Constitution written in a legal form for people to be able to refer to when it comes to this sort of stuff. And again, this is going back to the 1st of November again, and they were all off signing their names over to Europe and one thing and another. And it was a case of, right, well, I'm not following them. And if they want to abandon us and us to our own devices, then fair dues, so be it. Go on, we'll wave you off. So doing that, what we'll do, a group of other people decided, we'll go down to Runnymede and make a series of declarations and get everything set up so that we can put everything back as it's supposed to be.
Quite right.
And that's what this second Grand Remonstrance is. We've already had a Grand Remonstrance in the 1620s. But this is the second Grand Remonstrance. Because what happened with the Remonstrance was, look, you're out of order, here's what we need to do. And if you don't follow it, then we ended up with the carried himself. So, when you're out, we ended up there. First strike's done. Now, we ought to come and start beheading everybody in Parliament, but the first strike is definitely done. And if anybody wants to read it, it does go through, and it's sort of in a legal way. The different evils and all the different. Yes, we'll get all.
Lazarus, hang on a second, brother. You're breaking up. It sounds as if they don't want this information getting out. Can you go back about 20 seconds and pick it up from there, because you was absolutely inaudible, really.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's basically a shortened version of it. It puts everything right. It sort of goes back and looks at all the different freedoms and all the different specific liberties in the way that they are written in all the different constitutional documents, and specific to all the twisted things that have happened more recently. And it literally just goes through and puts everything back right, and it has been declared, and it has been sent in, and it's been published by Parliament.
Right, I see. Yeah, you come through perfect then. Yeah, we've got the document here. It's a great bit of work, mate. Yeah. Yeah. What was the importance? Why did you pick that particular spot to read it in, Lazarus?
Well, that's because of Magna Carta. That's where, again, it's the key. It's the cornerstone. That's the cornerstone location.
Yes, and the significance of that, I think, is very important. I mean, the symbology there the energy would be the perfect place, the perfect setting to do it. How did it feel reading it, mate?
It was actually really it was quite an interesting day because everybody was just it was funny because everyone was sort of pensive and really quite not sure about this. Are we going to end up with the police storming us? Are we going to end up with a load of problems? And the place was basically abandoned. It was pretty much abandoned. There were a few people milling around, and a few people stopped to listen to what we were talking about and what we'd got to say. And we basically held a Witangenoch, which is a form of ancient parliament, but it's not a corporate body with its own set of rules and regulations. It's just a meeting of minds, basically, of how to keep things right, how to put things right, how to deal with everything that's going on. And what we did was we basically ran through, we made all the different declarations, and we'd got everything sorted out, and we'd come to all the different agreements that had been sort of pre-considered. And the remonstrance had already been written up, and everybody that was there had chance to read it. And it was done really quite cleverly, because there's always been this big sort of spiel over Magna Carta as to whether or not it was ever ratified, whether or not it was ever given force of law, and whether it was signed under duress and all of this sort of stuff. The reality of Magna Carta is this was happening a period in time after Roman law had been banned, remember. So the concept of it being actually being a contract of any sort completely goes out the window, because again, that's a piece of Roman law. So you don't have to worry about whether or not Magna Carta was signed, and it wasn't. It was sealed, and that's because King John himself was illiterate, but that's for another talk. So what happened was we did it, instead of as a contract, we did it as a compact, which is everybody that was there was in agreement, and we all agreed to it, but nothing was signed, nothing was sealed. It was agreed to in principle. And now it's been passed on to Parliament. They basically got two choices. They actually run with this and put everything back right, or they are left floating in the wind, because it is a people's document. It's not a government bill, so they cannot repeal it. It's not theirs to repeal. And we have Roman law now, and he who creates owns is a principle of Roman law. Well, the people created this. It was done for the people by one of the people. So it's a people's document. They cannot touch it. They cannot repeal it. They can't get anywhere near this stuff. It's ours. So they're sort of left floating in the wind quite a lot. And, I mean, this has been, like I say, this has been published by Parliament, and it's been read over by barristers, and we had contract lawyers and all sorts of people there, and they all went through it and said, yeah, it's all fine by me, this is all fine, that's all fine, this is all fine, it's great, yeah, but this is exactly what's needed, blah, blah, blah. And if you agree to it, then basically that's what you are now governed by. Like I say, they can't touch it. It's all really quite interesting stuff.
Yes, I imagine it was a very magical day.
Yeah. Everybody was so relieved when we came away. It was just everybody was happy, smiles, giggles, bouncing around. It's like everybody just suddenly got this new energy to them once we'd finished, to the point where they all went wandering off after dark, and the car park got closed, and one guy was trying to break his car out of the car park because he just couldn't put the dust back in time.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. But this is it. This is the energy we got to bring to this fight, for want of a better way of describing it. Laz, isn't it? I mean, there's no other way. We can't come and face some of the same kind of vibe that they got. Like, and doing these symbolic things may sound like little gestures to some people out there, but actually they're absolutely huge. And these little things are going on all over the ley lines, all over the world. The energy and the vibe is changing, and they are running. They're scared. I believe they're terrified of it, Lazarus, to be quite frank.
It's not exactly something that they are keen on, shall we say, because it decentralises them and it shakes the very... It puts our keystone back in place and takes theirs out, because everybody's been operating on the 1297 version of Magna Carta, which isn't the one that stuck. The 1225 version was the one that actually stuck. 1215 didn't even really do that much damage, but it set the precedent. It gave a foothold. See, everybody's got this sort of strange concept that the barons didn't like the way they were being governed and wanted to be governed differently. But again, it's one of these things where you find that it's completely upside down. That wasn't the case. It was a case of, look, you're doing things wrong. You've got to go back to these rules, these right way of doing things. You've got to put things back as they've always been. Otherwise, we lose all of our fundamental freedoms. And that's where it all comes from. And it's by going back and finding out, not inventing something, not inventing some new thing. And a lot of people are sort of, were kind of panicking about it, saying, "Oh, if we have data lagio non concedendo, then nobody's going to pay any taxes and we won't have any roads." Well, that's rubbish. It's complete rubbish. Up until 1912, 1913, not a single person in America paid any tax, but they still had railways, they still had roads, they still had all of this stuff. And the reason being was because governments do this strange thing, and there's this funny little thing that everybody seems to have forgotten about, which is foreign investment. And there are all sorts of foreign investments that our government has in all corners of the world, and they are raking it in. They are absolutely bloody raking it in from these foreign investments. And taxes in themselves aren't even necessary to maintain all services. What's happening is that it's all getting shoved under the carpet and pushed into the IMF, while everybody in the country is being screwed over to pay all the interest on all the bank loans that the government have been taking out. And most of that has been used for themselves, for their own means, to send money overseas to supply our enemies with weapons.
Sustainable development. Yeah,
which strangely enough, King John did, and Charles did, and, again, it's all stuff that's happened before.
Yeah, rob off the poor to get to pay for everything, and show your babies onto the bayonets of the rich boys.
Well, this is just so that you've got a bit of background, because occasionally I'll just flip out and start ranting something in Latin. Data lagio non concedendo is a very little important piece of legal speak, and this is something again, and it comes out of Magna Carta, and it's there shall be no scutage or aid levied in our kingdom without general consent. So unless you consent to taxation, you cannot be taxed. You have to consent to it. In the actual remonstrance itself, it says, as was used by the Commons before their absorption by the executive, leading to the destruction of effective separation of powers, and as is indeed valid for an informed people, the right of data lagio non concedendo shall now be taken. Whereas this has been a right of Parliament, it shall also be a right of all, the ability to control the state through the power of the purse. This has been a valid method of control since time immemorial and enshrined in the Constitution. Usurped powers and actions of the state shall no longer be funded without option, and the separation of powers shall be replaced and maintained. The men and women of this nation are those who grant money to government and therefore ought to have individual primacy on deciding what, if anything, should be granted.
There we go. A beautiful way to take us to a show promo. Andy's just given me the nod.
FreedomTalkRadio.co.uk.
Let's go!
This is the most diverse, most amazing, one of the funniest radio stations you could ever listen to on the internet. I've heard so much stuff from the ups, the downs, the lefts, the rights.
The politics, the non-politics, the schmolitics, whatever you want to call them.
It's great.
I think that's the end of the promo. Mr. Richard, are you there, sir?
I'm here. I'm all right, young man. How's yourself?
Very good, brother. Very good.
I've been listening in avidly whilst I've just had to put the stir fry on hold while I interject at the junction.
Let's get a bone going there, dear. Happy days.
If you don't eat, guys, you die.
Apparently.
Daz, you're doing well, brother. You're doing really well. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, man. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. We've been seeing some quite interesting activities going on the last couple of weeks. Some friends of mine, Toby Lee and Lisa, put up a video of two constables that accosted them on a hard shoulder on a motorway down in Plymouth, and thus far it's had 1.2 million views.
Oof. Wow.
And on Monday, in a Maidstone county court, Lisa and Toby managed to get a female judge to act as a fiduciary and stood under and said, "What can I do for you?" We're in good times. We're in good times. I can see positive things in the very near future. What about yourself?
Well, I'm doing some different bits and pieces, and I'm not quite so active in the in courts and things like that, because I operate on the basis of always agree with your adversary quickly, lest he drag you before the magistrate.
Sure.
And as a man who's read the Bible, you'll be able to appreciate that one.
Sure enough.
But this is one of the principles that I always tend to deal with, so that rather than end up actually at court, just tell them in the first place, that give them parts of the Constitution, and this is what I tend to do. Give them parts of the Constitution, speak it out to them in no uncertain terms. You are not allowed to do this. It's in the Constitution that you can't do this, and then refer them to the response given in Arkell versus Prestram in 1973.
Yeah, that's good solid advice there. Good solid advice. Lads, is there? We've been having not altercations, but we've been interacting for the last few months. It's always very handy for people to know where to go to find the information, to get the documents, and to come into this knowledge. Have you got anywhere that these people can come and find your material and what it is that you know?
My material is mostly, I'm very much still of the bardic tradition. Most of it's in my head, because if I write it down, I'll forget it. But the version, the current version as it stands of the remonstrance is, the common law courts have got it, and I haven't tried it yet, but I'm considering writing to Parliament and asking them for a copy of it, because they have published it. We have had emails come back, and a number of people have sent it in, and we have had emails come back to a whole load of people saying that they have published it.
That is fantastic news.
Yeah, so they're aware of it. I haven't actually got to the point of saying, "Oi, can I have a copy?" But they're aware of it. They have published it. They know it exists, and that gives it legitimacy far more than I could. That it now is part of the next it's part of the next step. It's the new refinement of the Constitution, and people can use this.
That is that's good. I'm quite friendly with Albert Burgess. Albert's known as a clear shooter, a straightforward thinker. Can be a bit wayward in his judgments at times. He comes from a different era. Not to say that that's taking anything away from him, because I love him dearly. But basically, Albert has always led me to be of an understanding that whenever constitutional documents get credibility and they're realised and put into Parliament and made sacred, that three things have to happen. You have to have the people come together, the estates and the monarchy, for that to be kind of a binding contract. What's your views on that?
Right, yeah. Now, this is one of the issues as far as the monarch is concerned. See, there's a lot of people who are still very much old school as to how the monarch operates, and they still believe that the monarch is sovereign, but this isn't the case. Hasn't been for a long time. The monarch hasn't been sovereign since we ended up with the concept of parliamentary supremacy. And this was all kind of done on a bit of a gentleman's understanding, but it caused a massive deformation in the English Constitution, which is one of the reasons why I was very careful to put the separation of powers to be reinstated in there, because it doesn't exist at the moment. We have no separation of powers.
I can qualify that because been to the Royal Courts of Justice and placed the Queen's Oath in the hands of one Master Leslie, who ignored the document. He just glassed over his glasses and he said, Parliament is sovereign, Parliament rules supreme.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why that was put in there. The Queen cannot do anything. And I've had word from the palace itself on this. I've written to them and said, why is nothing being done from that? And the Queen can't do anything. She can't get involved in anything. She's basically kept out of it. And this whole concept of royal assent, because bills still have to go for royal assent. But the Queen never has anything to do with any of that either. This is one of the things that people don't know. It's passed through to what are known as her cousins, who are people that have letters patent in order to be able to give assent to Parliament. And what Parliament have done is the same way as they've done with the House of Lords. They've taken all of the hereditary peers out and replaced them with yes men. They've done the same thing with all the royal cousins. A lot of the royal cousins they're not actual cousins, but they're people who've got the necessary papers, shall we say, again, have been taken out and replaced with yes men. So we have no separation of powers. Everything is just concentrated power, and what Parliament says, Parliament can do. But there's one thing that they keep overlooking, and this is the one trip up that they will always find. And the one thing that I will take, that anybody ever asks me about when it comes to this stuff, is we have Magna Carta, we have the rule of law, and Parliament is not there by divine right. They are there because they were chosen to be there, and if they start breaking rules, back again to this point of the Crown can do no wrong, it's literally a case of if they put out a bad law that doesn't match what's in the Constitution or affects anybody's rights, then that law has to be ignored. And it's anybody who carries out any kind of punishments or any kind of adverse reams, but goes beyond their reach, shall we say, with members of the general public who are liable for prosecution at that point in time because they're following a bad law.
Wow. Yes, it is. I mean, I see what's been going on with Prince Andrew, the attacks that the people have been making in the papers and the way it's been hypersensitised. I think that this is the beginning of the destabilisation of the monarchy, because for Parliament to get their end game, which is what they've been trying to do for centuries, it is to destabilise and do away with monarchy.
Yeah, but what you see, this is one of the things, and it comes down to a misunderstanding of what and who we are. Because every time you turn the TV on and every time you deal with anything that has anything to do with any kind of governance in this country, they keep going on democracy, 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 democracy is the loop word, it's the buzzword, it's the one that's always repeated. But the word democracy is actually a lie as well. We're not a democracy and we never have been. A democracy is something that was dreamt up in Greece, but it isn't one of the things that has ever actually constitutionally existed here. We are a constitutionally limited monarchic republic. But it's easier to say democracy, so people get lazy and they just say democracy. That's not actually what we are. You go all the way back through all the documents, you go back to as far as you like, right the way back to the 5th century BC. We have always had a monarchy, even if it was only a regional monarch. There's always been a monarch, tribal leader, sovereign, or something of some description. There's always been someone there that can gather the clans, that can gather the people so that they can come together for the mutual defence. But that's what they're trying to get rid of, is our ability to come together for mutual defence and to get rid of the traditional way of doing that. So if you get both of those in the bud, then you've got no way of defending yourself, and they can impose a totalitarian state. But this isn't a conspiracy thing. This is just the way that governments operate, because they have a greed for money, they have a greed for power, just the same as any other person does. The only thing is that because you've got great power, you then end up with great corruption, which is why nothing was ever kept that centralised, and every region had its own parliaments. But what's ended up happening is all of these parliaments have started being pulled together, and now you have to send representatives down to London. And London's got the central bank, and London's got all these different things. London. Before now, York had a mint, Chester had a mint, Leicester had a mint, Portsmouth had one, Plymouth had one, Chester had one. Everywhere had their own mint. So there was no central bank. There was lots and lots and lots of little banks all over little mints and treasuries all over the place for each of the different cathedral cities. And each of the different cathedral cities largely had their own central governance unit. And it was only when it became a requirement that everybody come together for their mutual defence that anybody actually had to get word from Parliament on that one. They were supposed to keep their intelligence, and because a lot of trade was coming in and out of there, so that's where the intelligence flowed backwards and forwards of what was going on in the wider world. So that's where first word would come that an impending attack is likely, so everyone would be able to get word out to the rest of the country, and everyone would be able to come together for their mutual defence. And this is the way it's always operated. But of course, that's why we've always had the right to bear arms. See, without the right to bear arms, how do you get King John to sign Magna Carta? How do you get rid of Charles I? How do you defeat the Danes? How do you repel how do you end up at the Battle of Hastings? You can't do this unless you've got this ability. And this is what they're trying to. This is one of the things that, again, governments just tend to do. It's part of their life cycle, if you like. Is that they try to quell any possibility of a popular rebellion, and they will do it by whatever means necessary. And constitutionally speaking, this is why it said in earlier documents, there shall be no standing armies during peacetime. But instead of having a standing army, a standing military, all they've done is they've militarised the police instead. We've basically got a standing army again. They've just given it a different name.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I see the police as a standing army. They've basically lost touch with who they are. My understanding and my sort of awakening come from a constitutional, ecclesiastical point of view, in that we have customs, we have this stuff enshrined, and so far it's protected me. What has made you kind of look at the Constitution in such great depths? Where does your passion come from, and what kind of initiated you to come down this road?
Right. As much as anything else, I mean, I was saying earlier, it's just because everything seemed back to front, the things just didn't make sense. A lot of it was to do with different people I knew who were struggling with fathers' rights, and it's a case of why can't a dad see his kids? There's something just genuinely abhorrent about that. I don't understand where that's come from, and I just saw misery popping up all over the place, and just finding more and more people who were being trodden on, and more reasons why people should be able to have weapons for their own defence and things like that. And the more I saw this happening, the more I found that these rights and things were being eroded, and I'm trying to think, well, surely there's some kind of protection for this, because the Americans have got their constitution, and as soon as you bring up the word constitution and Bill of Rights, everybody automatically thinks, America. So where's our protection? How are we supposed to protect ourselves against the state getting too powerful for itself?
Well, with good men like yourself, lads, they won't never achieve their end game. I take my hat off to people like yourself. I haven't got a hat quite like yours, but I have to commend you on what you're doing. You're getting the message out there. And it is at this particular moment in time about planting seeds, and then they're turning into mighty oaks. And I'm sure people in 50, 60 years' time will listen to what you've had to say and the stuff that you've done, and look at you with great affection. I'm going to bug on out now, guys. I'm going to carry on listening into this wonderful incitement into our constitutional law. And anyone else who wants to come in and ask Lazarus questions, please do. And I'll speak to you all very soon.
Nice one.
Oh, you go.
Love you, Dave.
Right,
love you more.
We got a Facebook call on the line, I believe, Andy, haven't we? Get them in.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Have we got anyone on the line?
Yeah,
hello,
Facebook caller.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the show, my friend. What's on your mind? Facebook caller?
Hello?
Hello? Yes, we can hear you. What's on your mind, pal? Have you got a question for Lazarus?
They've disappeared.
Never mind. It sometimes happens.
Well,
maybe they get...
It's just another sort of interesting little piece that people generally don't seem to know about. And that's the Court of Common Pleas. Now, again, this is Magna Carta. Common pleas shall not follow our court, but shall be held in some place certain. This is why we have all these courts dotted around all over the place. A lot of people didn't have this. And this is, again, it's a function of the common law, because originally, if anybody had any kind of gripe, if you wanted to try and sue somebody, you had to go and see the king. And, the Angevin and Plantagenet kings would just disappear off. They'd be like 2,000 miles away. They'd be all over the place in France. They'd be up in the right up to the top end near Scotland, and they could have been anywhere, and you had to be really quite well off to be able to go and chase these buggers down and say, yeah, I'm trying to sue someone. But because originally we had this system whereby we had these little local courts, after the Norman invasion, that got lost. And the Angevin and Plantagenet kings said, no, we're not having everybody having their own little courts and one thing. We decide. And this was another function that came in with Magna Carta. This was another thing that they did, was they said, no, you can't do that. We want to have all our little courts back. We want to have our regional courts back in place again. The reason we had those in the first place was going back, and you've got to go back to the 800s at this point. You go back to Alfred the Great, because he did something very peculiar. This was something I was on about earlier. When the Roman Empire collapsed and they all disappeared back to Rome, the Roman law sort of maintained itself in Europe to a large degree, but we ended up coming up into what became known as the Dark Ages, because things didn't get written down quite so much. I mean, we've got the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles started off, which Alfred the Great did again. He taught himself Latin so that he could teach other people all this information. He was an educator in his own right. He then sent all his justices out, and Henry II did this as well. It's really quite bizarre. But he sent his justices out into the different towns and cities to find out from the people what the law was. And the justices basically discovered what the law was from the people and then applied it. It wasn't made up by Parliament or by the King. It was gathered from the people. This is one of the confusions with common law. It's our own law. It's not the law of government. It's not government rules and regulations. Government rules and regulations are brilliant for governments, but they're not for people. And this is where you end up with, again, this difference between law and legislation. Because the common law says different to the things that government would necessarily agree with, and vice versa.
Yeah,
but
indeed.
Then you end up with principles that end up being followed in ecclesiastical courts, which are the courts of admiralty and the courts of the two universities. But it's nothing more than what's known as lex sub liti graviori, which is law derived from a higher law. They cannot make, again, in courts, they cannot make or cause to be imposed any law which isn't agreed with from a higher position. And the greatest voice in the kingdom, going all the way back to 460, is the people. The people have a greater voice than the state. It's all really quite interesting stuff when you start to dig into it. And there's some brilliant books out there, but some of them aren't in print anymore. I've got some really interesting bits and pieces that you just can't get hold of. But different bits and pieces where the different concepts of the police, etc., are concerned. I mean, very few people realise that there was no such thing as the police before a certain time. They sort of forget. But the whole police service are a relatively recent invention, and it's only just recently that they've started becoming described as the police force rather than service. And this again is going back to this militarisation of oppressive government to squash and oppress everybody below them, to make sure that they can basically stomp all over your property rights, stomp all over your common law rights, and stomp all over every other right, so that they can hoard all your gold and your property and different things like that. And it's really quite bizarre stuff. We have, in actual fact, I'll tell you what, I've got one of my books here. Let's just have a quick look and see if I can find the right part, because there's a piece in here.
We're still looking for that, lad. I believe have we got that caller back, Andy? Hello, caller?
Hello?
Hello. Welcome to the show. Thank you for holding, my friend. What's on your mind?
Oh, it's me, Darren.
Who's that?
Leroy.
Oh, hello, Lee. All right, mate?
I've only just worked out how to get on here, mate.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, sound. We live at the moment. Have you enjoyed the show? Got any questions for Lazarus?
Yeah, it's been quite informative. I just wanted to ask if Lazarus knows anything about gilt bonds, which are gilt-edged bonds used by the government, basically they say to raise money.
Is that gilt-edged bonds, you said, Lee, is it?
Yeah, that's right, Darren.
Yes. Do you know anything about that, Laz?
What was it, bonds?
Gilt-edge.
Oh, gilt-edge. No, you see, that's going into how, whether or not it's a piece. This sort of concept, and it kind of drives me nuts, but I'm not really up to date on bonds. I know what the government basically do. They treat everybody as stock, as chattel, and every time somebody's born, they start basically promising their buddy taxes for the next 60 or 70 years to the banks just to try and get loans out of them. So I know what they're up to, but there's this concept which I always tend to say to people, and it's something that they clearly don't follow, but everybody else can sort of listen to this one. When it comes to pieces of paper, if you set light to it, what have you got? You've just got ashes and hearsay. People put too much faith in pieces of paper, and the government are brilliant at doing this. They always put in faith in pieces of paper. Even on American banknotes, it says "In God We Trust." It's an issue of faith. It's not real. I've got a piece of paper, right, that promises to pay the bearer on demand the sum of. I mean, that's a bond, if you like. But it's a bond of the banks to give you something that they're no longer got because of the fractional lending. So it's worthless. Essentially, it just ends up becoming worth exactly what it is as a piece of paper, which is nothing. But I mean, the whole concept of gilt-edged bonds, I mean, the only thing I can think of on that sort of line of thinking is that somebody went out of their way to make it a little posh and put some gold leaf around the edge of it. You can get it from the local art and craft shop.
Yeah. We'll have to have a look at that another time, I think, Lee. I've not quite heard of that term before, although I imagine there'll be some relevance to it within the scheme, let's say. We've got Dave here, who's asked a question in the chat box. How can we get it recognised by a judge, lad? I assume he's off about the document.
How can you what, sorry?
How can we get your document recognised easily by a judge? That's off Dave in the chat room.
How can you get it easily recognised by a judge?
Yes.
Personally, I just do what I do with it and just send it in and just say, look, this is the latest refinement of the Constitution. What have you got to say for yourself?
Yeah.
It's literally a case of doing that. I mean, if you sort of say, well, I'm thinking of maybe that I could use this, they're just going to go, well, no, because they know you don't know what you're talking about. But if you go in there, balls out, and just say, right, this is the latest refinement of the Constitution, I suggest you read it. You obviously haven't been informed, so let me educate you. Here you go, here's a copy. Go and have a read.
Absolutely.
It's like that. They're going to go, whoa, okay, right. Yeah,
it comes down to authority and who perceives to have it. and until you let these judges know that indeed they're not dealing with somebody who's represented by a solicitor.
A lot of people who are judges and such like, they sit in their high and mighty halls, and again, it all comes down to money. They make more money than a lot of other people, so they look down their noses at other people. But if you go in there and say, "Excuse me, public servant," and then just watch them lose their shit, they hate that. But if you actually say to them, "Right, excuse me, are you or are you not a public servant? I'm a member of the public, and here's the latest. As far as I'm aware, don't even say that. Just say, I'm a public servant. Here's the latest refinement to our Constitution. I hope you're aware of this. I will be asking questions later. And just push it in front of them and just say to them, deal with it."
Spot on. Lads, we've got 10 minutes left, and we're out of time then, my friend. So, what advice, or is it any other thing you'd like to express this evening? Have you got your own website, or what other information can the listeners and everyone else who catches up with the show later on the podcast and alike, how can they chase this up and drill into it more in their own time, Lars?
Well, I do have a group on Facebook, which is Magna Carta and the Rule of Law, which is fairly interesting. I don't get on there as much as I would like to, because I'm about to start in the next 5 days. I'm about to start a university course on Magna Carta to see if I can teach them anything, which should be fairly amusing. But I've got a Facebook page, which is Lazarus Ryalbran, Ryalbran, which I've had to put together because it was Lazarus McDangerous, but Facebook made me change my name. Other than that, if anybody's got any questions or anything, they can always chase me up on there. It doesn't have to be in public. You can send me private messages. I don't say anything to anybody else about anybody's business because it's not mine in the first place. But there's all sorts of books that you can still get hold of. One of my absolute favourites, and it's a fascinating read, is The Constitution of England by Jean-Louis Delhomme. And that's spelt Jean Louis Delhomme. But it's a big, thick, heavy, hardback book, and I mean, you're looking at, 350-odd pages. But it's an absolutely fascinating read, and it goes through a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about. Huge amount of it. I mean, it delves back into a lot of the stuff that comes out of Rome. It comes back, to Roman law, etc. It doesn't go that early as far as English law is concerned. There are other bits and pieces that you can pick up from that, but that's when you start dealing and diving into things like the brute Cilio and all the other. There's countless number of different brutes, etc. And a lot of that gets a lot more complicated because you have to start forgetting who they told you to be before you can dig into that stuff. You've got to start thinking more as a much more humble, much more simple person before you will understand it. Posh bastards with all their big flashy cars, massive houses and things like that will never understand the tribal law. It will never come to them because they've not been put in a position or a situation to have needed that wisdom. So they will never find it. They will never get it. And while that's still available, and I mean it's one of the most restricted, one of the most hidden pieces of our history, that it's absolutely ridiculous. There are a number of reasons for it, and the reasons for that will become obvious to anybody who actually spent any time reading it.
Fascinating.
But the brute Cilio in itself, and one other thing that I would really recommend people do, and I know this sounds stupid, and a lot of people find that this is probably a little bit mad and a little bit bizarre, but do your best to learn Welsh or Cornish because that's as close as you're going to get to our original language. And the grammarians banned the speaking of Welsh and Cornish in Parliament because, unlike French, they couldn't put a different law dictionary together of Welsh and Cornish words, so their meaning always remains stable and steadfast. They cannot change it, and they can't touch it because it's not theirs. The original tribal language is still kept in Wales, and it's still kept in Cornwall. There are a number of places where you can go to find this stuff, and if you walk into the House of the Parliament and start speaking Welsh, they will go white and they will throw you out as soon as they hear it. You cannot speak Welsh there because you cannot distort the words. And it's a really, really fascinating subject when you start going into the linguistics of it. Bloody fascinating stuff. But that's as close to as you can get to the original Celtic languages of these tribal lands. And they won't tell you that, and they won't teach it to people in school either, which is very strange when you consider that we're connected to Wales, but we're not connected to France, yet French is what everyone gets taught. I find that bizarre, and always have done. And that was another thing that sort of started me off on this journey as well, was the fact that we're connected to Welsh, but nobody gets to learn Welsh. Why is that? Why are they trying to kill the languages off?
Oh, they definitely tried.
Diolch I chi, Laz. Thank you, Laz. Dwi'n dysgu siarad Cymraeg ar y saith adroddiadau yn Pontarddulais. I learned to speak Welsh on a building site in Pontarddulais.
I hope that's bloody right, because you might have dropped us in there if you've got a pronunciation wrong there, Scribe, but I'll back you, sir.
It gets very, very interesting, some of it. As it stands at the moment, I'm not that great with that because I'm trying to pick up bits of Anglo-Saxon, which is really bizarre. I'm sort of dealing with different words so that I can understand where different parts of English words came from, so I can try to unpick some of this legalese bullshit.
Yeah. Well, yes, and that's what it is bullshit, all right. We've got 2 minutes left, Lazarus. I'd like to thank... 90 seconds. I'd like to thank you, brother, for getting this out and spending some time with us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure.
More than welcome.
Would you be interested in coming down and to one of our meetings? Of course, we'd put you up. Maybe you could team up with Dave or something. Both come down together, like, kind of thing, and we put you up overnight and accommodate you, of course. Yeah, we're up for that.
Well, there is potential for it. I never say no to anything straight away, but I am a rather busy man, it has to be said. But never say never is one of my key phrases, because you never know.
Lovely. Well, there we are. Thank you again, my friend.
Thanks, Les. Appreciate that.
No worries, guys. Take care, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you too, Dave.
Thank you very much for your time.
Always, brother.
He's very knowledgeable, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. I should say.
And that's where the power is, isn't it?
Oh, indeed.
I'd rather have him on my side than as an adversary.
Oh.
I am the ultimate anti-Illuminati.
God bless you all.